If you go back to the time you spent at the Air Force, how did that shape the person you are today?
Oh, great question to kick things off. I would say, that my Air Force experience is probably very foundational to who and what I am today. So I was very lucky that, straight out of school, I joined the military, went to the Defence Force Academy, and, spent 3 years of officer training there. At the age of 20, in my third year, I was a cadet in charge of like 180 people, So we kind of talk about leadership and management experience, talk about kind of being thrown in there at the deep end at, age 20, and things have kind of built from there. So I think for me, the Air Force experience is very foundational. The experience that I had even prior to that, so I went to school, but I was in their training corps, as a kid, so Air Force cadets. So I had a kind of a military interest and background and exposure, as a teenager even. So even before I joined the Air Force, I'd already been exposed to that. So I think some of that was already kind of being ingrained in me, even at a young age, even before I kind of joined, out of school. So I think, really what the Air Force taught me, we could probably have an entire conversation about, what the Air Force taught me, but I guess it's fair to say that it was very, very foundational. And I think a lot of the skills, the frameworks and the methodologies that I guess the Air Force and the military kind of more broadly kind of taught me have really set me up for life. That I think what a lot of people, and I probably didn't understand at the time, was how applicable that is just to life, to business, and to everything else. And so I think when you're kind of young and you're 18, you're very focused on thinking about how this is applicable to what I've got to do. As in my case, I was an officer. So how do I, from a leadership point of view and people that I'm going to have to lead and manage in my career, how do I and how does all that relate to the conduct of military operations and things like that? But what I probably didn't appreciate at the time, where I do now, is just how important a lot of those skills and that is. So what was all that, and what did that kind of teach me in terms of that foundation? I think, like I said, we could probably have an entire conversation about that. But, I think, everyone kind of thinks about the military and the discipline and some of those things. But what that does in that, especially in that initial training, is really, I guess, get you used to that kind of structure and that environment. And then everyone is operating in the same environment. And so, everyone that you're dealing with in the military is kind of been through the same thing. So there is a kind of common understanding and a common acceptance of what you've kind of all been through. So when you're trying to build a team and you try to build higher performance, you start to realize, I guess, as I look back on that, how important from a cultural perspective, having some of those kind of common experiences, going through common training, have everyone have a degree of trust and acceptance that I know that you, when I say something, know exactly what I mean, and that I can trust and know that you're going to kind of carry it out in a particular way. When we get a whole lot of people into organization and we don't go through a degree of, say, decent onboarding, we don't give people a kind of common understanding of values and what it is that we're, purpose, we would call it these days, what it is that we're here to kind of achieve, you start to realize that that's when some of those kind of cultural and organizational aspects start to fall apart. So I think one of those early foundations for me, especially around all that initial training, is just how important it is to essentially form a team and for everyone to kind of go through some of that common training, be really, really, we would talk about, aligned in terms of values these days, just how important that is to then build, high performance teams. And so I think if you're wanting to build, as I look at it these days, high performance teams, you realize how important some of that foundational stuff is. That's kind of one aspect when you go through all that training. But I guess more broadly, what did the military teach me? I think, what the military ultimately is about from an officer training point of view, and what I went through is, how do I lead a group of people, often with a range of kind of different or disparate, backgrounds, different training and different, roles or job types that they have. And how do I bring them all together, align them around a purpose and unite them around that, but lay the foundation so that I can set them up for success. So I think, the basis of a lot of that kind of officer training is, it's not about you, it's about other people. And, you're trying to make sure that you're doing the right thing for other people, setting them up for success, setting the conditions in place so they can succeed. And, there's a book, I think, by Simon Sinek, where I think he talks about leaders eat last, and we were always taught officers eat last. And the idea is that from a kind of service point of view, you're making sure that, all your troops and all the people under your command, if that's the case, are taken care of. And if you're eating last, if the food's run out before it's got to you, then you know that there's a couple of people that kind of haven't eaten. And if the officer, the boss, is eating last, then the cooks will be making sure that there is plenty of food for everyone, because I don't want the boss to kind of miss out at the end, And so you can kind of, pull that apart in lots of different ways, but it is very much about this mindset from a leadership point of view, that you are there to kind of serve those and look after those that are under you, if you want to, think of it in that context. And so I think that is a very, very important kind of foundation that is stuck with me, that it is about me making sure that I'm looking after the people that are, I hate the word beneath me, because that, but that's the way I guess the military would kind of talk about it in a rank structure sense. But I guess, looking after the people that are in, that you're responsible for would probably be a better way of thinking about it. So that was definitely the kind of the officer aspect of that. And how do you get the most out of people? Then there's obviously the very military aspects to it, which is around, how do you kind of plan and conduct operations that is ultimately about, how do we prevail and win over an adversary? And how do I then have an organization and systems and structures that kind of support that as well? So I think, the foundations again there around, the importance of planning, the importance of, preparation and bringing everyone together on that are skills that I think, in my case have been very, very applicable, in careers subsequent, around the importance of planning and how important kind of rehearsal is, when you don't want to just go and do something for the first time, in combat, because it'll all kind of go wrong. You want to have, rehearsed that as much as you can. You want to have trained for that as much as you can. The idea, kind of train hard, fight easy, is very, very true. And I think a lot of organizations just expect everyone to kind of rock up on the day and everything to kind of go smoothly, versus, hey, how much have we actually practiced this? Have we rehearsed this? Have we trained for this? So that then on the day, you've kind of practiced for all these million things that could go wrong. And then on the day, only a few things go wrong. And you're like, oh, that's easy because we've kind of trained for that. So I think, that was definitely something that I probably took away, certainly from some of that earlier kind of military training. And then obviously, got to then apply that for real, in operational service in the Middle East and Iraq and other places, to actually see how all that actually, does it actually work, when you actually kind of got to, do it for real. So I think, I was very, very lucky in terms of what I got exposed to during my Air Force career. It definitely didn't give me that. It definitely gave me that foundation that has been able to be applied elsewhere. And then the next bit is that it is applicable, beyond the military.